Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. It's a really exciting day because this is our first day of the MenEngage Ubuntu Symposium, where we will be having parallel sessions. So as many of you know, the Ubuntu Symposium kicked off last week, and we had 3 days full of sessions. It was a really exciting and vibrant space. It's been created together with MenEngage Alliance members and partners from all around the world, and it really came together last week. And this week is the first week of our regular ongoing program. And on Tuesday, we had a plenary with a stocktaking of the man and masculinities field. And yesterday, we had cross-regional network sessions with the MenEngage regional networks. And today is the first day that we will be having parallel sessions. So these are sessions that have been submitted by MenEngage members and partners. And we're really thankful to Wessel for proposing this session. And so, yes, we invite everybody to continue to be part of the journey. Today is about the politics of care. It's the first of a 4-part webinar series that Wessel van den Berg of Sonke Gender Justice has put together. And my task is just to run you through a couple of logistics for the session. Maybe actually let me introduce myself. Sorry, I skipped that part. I'm Joni van der Zand. I work as a co-director of the MenEngage Alliance Global Secretariat. And I'm from the Netherlands. I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. area in the United States. So yes, we will have different languages. Actually, I realized that I can skip this part. What we're having is closed captions interpretation. So for those of you who would like to, or who would rather use a different language than hearing only in English, you can choose your own subtitles. By going to the left of the screen, there should be a button that says live, and you can put on custom live streaming, and it will open in a separate link, and then you can choose your language. So we have here on the right-hand side are the languages that we provide closed captions in. And you will be able to, if you open up that separate screen, you can make it small and you can put it at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So you will be seeing the live text translations of the speakers in the language of your preference. Please also follow us along on the hashtag. If you are using Twitter at all, we use Ubuntu Symposium in English, Symposio, that's spelled wrongly, I see, Ubuntu in Spanish. And I think that makes me hand it over to Wessel. Wessel, once again, thanks so much for putting this together, and I look forward to listening to the session unfold.
Thank you so much, Joni, and congratulations to you already for you and the rest of the MenEngage global team for the fantastic event last week, and now that's unfolding as we speak. Just to say that the beeping that we're hearing all the time is new friends who are joining us from around the world. So it's I think as we have our colleagues join us and friends join us from around the world, the beeping will settle down. I am going to just switch to my screen so I can show the slides that I've prepared, and then we'll start with an introduction of the day and of the colleagues and the friends who are on the call with us. So as Joni said, this is the first in a series of 4 seminars, and all of them will be about a particular description of an ethic of care, and particularly a political engagement with an ethic of care. And today's session is about the first phase in an ethic of care called Men Caring About, or Caring About. I am really honored and pleased to be joined by 4 friends who have kindly agreed to join the conversation. Let me please introduce, ask each of the colleagues to introduce themselves. And I will ask Mbuyiselo to please introduce yourself to the audience.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you, Vessel, for this opportunity. My name is Mbuyiselo Buota. I have worked with Vessel whilst at Sonke Gender Justice for many, many years. I was in charge of the media portfolio at Sonke. I have worked also with Gary. I remember one day I woke Gary at 4 a.m. South African time. We're going to a television interview. He had to be there by 4:30, and we missed our way to the studio. So I hope he has forgiven me for that. So I now work as the commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equality. Now, Commission for Gender Equality is one of the Chapter 9 institutions. There are 6 in the country, and they're called Chapter 9 because they are found in the Chapter 9 of our Constitution with a sole mandate to protect our democracy. So you have the Commission for Gender Equality, which I work for. You also have the CRL, the commission that focuses on language, religion, and cultural communities. You also have the Human Rights Commission, Auditor General. So our forebears, the people who conceptualize our democracy and our constitution, knew that we'll come to a space where this democracy needs to be protected. So that's, in short, what we do as a Commission for Gender Equality. And I came here with wearing my cap of working with men and boys. I've known no other work other than focusing on engaging men as allies to the emancipation of men from a toxicity of masculinity. Thank you, Vessel.
Thank you, Mbuyiselo. Then we are very honored to be joined by our colleague Asanda Ngwasheng. Asanda and our friend Rukia Cornelius are colleagues, and we are missing Rukia. She is driving to the Northern Cape at the moment, but we are very pleased that Asanda can join us, and hopefully in some of the future seminars, both Asanda and Rukia can join us. So Asanda, please introduce yourself to us.
My name is Asanda Ngwasheng. I am a gender and race activist based in South Africa. I also work with Oxfam South Africa, and because I'm a race and gender activist, this work of talking about the role of men and the role of men, particularly in care work and what the politics of care are, is something that's really close to my heart. So I'm looking forward to participating in this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Asanda. And then our friend Thomas. Thomas has been a part of the MenCare family for as long as we have, since the inception, since 2011. Although the organizations around Thomas changes, Thomas remains involved in MenCare. So it's wonderful to have you as a part of the conversation, Thomas, while you are just on the point of going on to parental leave. But please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Vessel. Yes, I am the father of 3. I have one son who's 12 and a daughter who's 10. And the smaller one, he's called Brother. And the small one, he's 10 months. So in January, I'll go on parental leave with him for 8 months until August. So I will be at the seminars on my leave as well, because I think this is the key to the work with men and boys, and especially today, because it's the International Men's Day. So I think working with care, I think, is the key to creating a world that is just and fair and sustainable as well. So as Vessel said, I've been in the MenEngage and MenCare family for many years, with the Men for Gender Equality Sweden, with Save the Children Sweden, and now with Plan International. And I lived in South Africa for a few years ago, and I've been also spending a lot of time in neighboring countries like Zimbabwe. So I hope I have some knowledge about the context that at least 3 of the colleagues in the conversation are coming from. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Vessel.
Thanks, Thomas. And as Mbuyiselo mentioned, we've collaborated with Gary in various spaces through the years, including we called it the soft launch of MenCare at the time in August of 2011 in Soweto at the football center. And we then consequently launched it in Washington, D.C. at the House of Sweden and it's coming up 10 years. So Gary, please give us an introduction to yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you. It's fun to be with colleagues that we've put MenCare into the world, and as you noted, it's coming up on 10 years. And I'm particularly, proud of together with all of you, trying to bring in this discourse of shifting to what we want men to be, not just talking about the things we want to prevent. I'm a developmental psychologist. Who, my work has been with fathers in many countries from the beginning of my career, working with low-income, formerly gang-involved fathers in Chicago, to work in low-income areas in Brazil. Also, a lot of that work with fathers and understanding kind of men's journeys in and out of care in connection to others. I'm a father as well, of a 22-year-old and a partner and a brother and a godfather. And I do think that, Ubuntu, as the name of the symposium, really does create this notion that we break down kind of men as individuals and see us in our web of relationships, and particularly our care duties to those around us. So thrilled that you brought up the topic, Vessel, and suggested this. And in Bucelo, just to finish, whatever time of morning you want me to wake up, I'm there with you, brother. It's great to see you again. So thanks.
Thanks, Gary. And my name is Wessel van den Berg. I work at Sonke Gender Justice. I'm a steering committee member for the MenCare Global Fatherhood Campaign, and our work has focused on various aspects of preventing violence and promoting gender equal care, especially involving fathers in promoting gender equal care in South Africa and in the Eastern and Southern Africa region. So I really again, I'm really happy that we're having this conversation, and this is the overview of the 4 parts to the conversation that we will have today. And I almost said this afternoon, but for me it's afternoon, but I understand we have friends from all around the world. So for the next hour or so, we will have these 4 parts to the conversation. And, a key goal for this seminar series is to establish a narrative and to awaken a narrative and to feed into a pre-existing narrative about care ethics within the MenEngage Alliance. And many of the organizations who are members of MenEngage around the world already work on promoting an ethic of care, especially more of the women's rights, feminist-focused organizations. And being a pro-feminist organization, MenEngage Alliance, I sometimes have felt in my own journey, I've neglected the decades of work that feminist scholars have done before us, because my particular trajectory followed work with men as an entry point into gender equality, rather than work from a broader women's rights perspective as an origin. So I endeavor with these 4 conversations to broaden the scope of the conversation beyond only the focus on men, however, to still anchor it in that conversation of, well, how can men be positioned in this broader discourse? So the 4 parts of the conversation will look at the moral boundaries of care as defined by a very influential thinker and theorist called Joan Tronto, who wrote a book of a similar name in the 90s. We will then look at her description of an ethic of care, which is only one description. There are lots of theories that have suggested ethics of care. And then we'll zoom into some of my own personal research in my doctoral study on families and how men participate in care as a practice in their families. And the first phase of care is caring about. And then we'll end by talking about some of the structural and policy implications of this aspect of an ethic of care that we call caring about something. So if we jump right into the conversation, and to make sure that the political is personal, let me ask our friends and panelists in the call. And let's start with, I'm just going to follow the faces I can see on my screen. So Thomas, let's start with you. When did you first become aware of caring about someone or something?
Thank you, Vessel. Yes, I also acknowledge that we're in different time zones. Here in Sweden, it's late afternoon, but I also know colleagues are, I guess, in the middle of the night and in the morning as well. So bear with us from your time zones. Anyway, I was disconnected a bit, but I think I heard what you say. I think this is a very, very tricky question to answer. As you said, this is very much about the feminist backgrounds of the women's that have been working with these issues for such a long time. So I think as men, or if we identify ourselves as men, as I do at least, to also acknowledge that. But I think my first awareness was when I was put into kindergarten as a 2-year-old, that someone else was caring about me. So I think that was kind of when I understood that caring is not just something my parents do, but others as well. And then I got a sister when I was 7. So then I guess I was starting to care about her. So that was, I think, the next step. Then another thing that I thought about was, because it's Black Friday on Friday, and when I was 18, I think me and some friends did a kind of a demonstration in our city in the north of Sweden, where we sat on the square and served hot chocolate and gingerbread cookies to people to sit down and relax and to think about caring about your relationships rather than caring about going shopping. Because Christmas is very much about caring for your friends and your family. So I think that was also, for me, from a more political perspective, something that I cared about, that I started to care about the rest of the world and something outside my own small sphere, so to say. And then I think my encounter with feminism and working with men and boys was actually a feminist men's group. So I also, as you said, encountered this by starting working with other men. And recently, it's a lot about the men care work, of course, in the men care campaign, working on engaging more men and fathers. And I've been doing fatherhood groups as well for some time. And I think it's an excellent way to get other men on board on the care in a broad sense. So I'm 46 now. So it started in the mid 70s. It's been around. I've been around, and it's been around for a while for me as well to work with care. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And the tradition of young Swedish people doing something in a public space to show their care about something, of course, is proudly continued with the Friends at Fridays for Future. So it's really nice to hear that echo about that. Boiselo, your awareness of caring about something or someone?
Well, thank you once again, Vessel. I will relate a personal story. In 1986, I got shot by apartheid police in the head. The bullet paralyzed my left hand side. My condition is called hemiplegia. I was amazed, and as I reflect now, every morning without fail, I was bedridden. I could not walk. I could not do anything. I had a friend who made it his business that without fail, he would come first at hospital to come and give me a shower, or to put me in to wash me. What he would do is he would take me and assisted by nurses. But again, what was for me, as I look back, is the nurses who were mainly on the majority women. They could not give me a bath because culturally, that here is young as I was. I mean, when I got shot in 86, I was 26 years old, and they were uncomfortable to give me a bath. They would not do it. So this guy, his name is Doug Boys. Doug Boys made it his business during my stay in hospital to make sure that he uses taxis to come and give me a bath. Other than that, as I got discharged from hospital, he came at home. I mean, we lived quite apart in Sharkville, but he made it his business. And when you asked me to take part, and when you asked the question at the beginning of this week, it made me to go back. It took me down memory lane, and I then began to appreciate. I mean, how a man cares for another man, but also in the process, how this man break barriers that were cultural, barriers that were religious. I mean, in my instance, I mean, a man, I mean, my younger sister, Buiswa, would not, would not see me naked, would not take me to a shower or to bath me. It was that boy's responsibility. But for me, why I'm sharing these colleagues with you and the rest of the world is that the barriers he was breaking are cultural, but also some deep-seated stereotypes that look, another man, and we don't do this quite often as men, it may be a generalization, that you see another man naked, and you also, other than when you are in prison or in hospital, or when you are completely when you are at someone's mercy, to be watched, to be bathed, passed. So I think that what he did for me was, in fact, a true, a deep meaning of what care means. How also a man would care, who was, by the way, who was black, who was Tswana, raised in a traditional setting, but we both, because I am in my vulnerability, I could not stay there, and so I could not stay there refusing someone to give me a shower, because I wanted to be clean. And here he was ready to say, Mbuyiselo, I will give you this. So Vessel, in short, it was for me a pregnant moment for me. And when I look back in the work that I've been doing, I do now with men, it never ceases to amaze me that indeed there is nothing inherently that stops us from caring. In fact, it's our own upbringing, it's our own socialization. I will stop there, Professor.
Thank you. No, Mbuyiselo, and I think the question, it's obviously what seems to be quite tangible is both when you care about something, but also when you have the experience of being cared, when somebody cares about you. And I think, for what I hear from your story, for that man to travel to the hospital to come and care for you, he clearly cared about you quite a bit. And we'll get into some of those boundaries that you mentioned that prevent people from actually engaging in care. Thank you very much for raising that. Asanda, your response to the question?
Hi, thank you again for having me on the panel. For me, it's quite similar to Mbuyiselo in the sense that I think about it in terms of my first awareness of what it is to be cared about before you can even understand what it means to care for. So for me, it's the realization that every morning my grandmother, before she went off to work, would make sure that there was, porridge on the stove for us to be able to eat before we went to school. And that for me was, my first example of caring. And I think for me, being raised in a mainly matriarchal home with a lot of women and girls, it then sort of started a trend or a line of connection between food and care, or food as as an example of care or a demonstration of care. And I'm somebody that quite likes and enjoys cooking. And so because of that first example of care, having been around food, one of the things I still enjoy to this day is making, Christmas food for my family, or having my family gathered around and having a meal for everybody to enjoy, because to me that is part of what it means to care, and it's connected very much to food and other things. So thank you for that deep reflection, because I hadn't really thought about it before.
Thanks, Asanda. And what I'm also, what's coming up for me when you talk about the food is the attention paid to the quality of food and the kind of, I guess, the loving care that you speak about, which is there's an element of craft and attention there, of actually paying attention to what you're doing. which I really appreciate. I hope we can share a meal in the near future at some point. The four of us should have a way to connect meals across the world. Over to you, Gary. Any reflections from you?
Yeah, I was thinking about, beyond the early childhood moments when, we're cared for by a parent or more than one or other caregivers, kind of an awareness of caring outside the nuclear family. I was about 11 or 12, and my grandmother, my father's mother, who from as early as I remember her, was always involved in a very activist church group that did support for the homeless and immigrant communities coming into Southern California, where I grew up initially. And I would spend much of the summer staying at her house usually. And one summer, I think I was around 11, she was doing volunteer work in the refugee camps of Vietnamese refugees who had moved to the US or been forced to relocate to the US after the end of the Vietnamese War. And much of my childhood was watching the news of what the US was doing in Vietnam, and the first time of meeting a refugee family. The father had been killed. There was a family there was a boy exactly my age, and I remember I was helping him think about English and what school was going to be like in the US, and that, the awareness that I credit my grandmother with giving me of looking at the harm that the US had done as a country, and I think instilling in me that you need to do something about this. There's direct individual harm, and there are things that obviously they didn't change the structural, but things about caring about this family that over the course of that summer, and ended up writing some after with the boy who I was working with him on his English, and just, his remembering the fear in his eyes and everything they had lost to be there. And I just credit my grandmother with how important it was to step out of myself as a preteen, and to have been obliged in very in a very important way to care about a planet, and I suppose the beginning of some of my political awakeness around the real harm done with some of my country's policies. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Gary. And what you're saying reminds me about one of the opening plenaries that we had last week in the Ubuntu Symposium, where I think it was a colleague from COFEM who shared the point that in one analysis, or from one feminist standpoint, the highest expression of love is not romantic love, or the highest expression of morality is not romantic love, but solidarity. And that, this, as you say, this kind of focus on the nuclear family is constructed in a particular way, but having a real sense of caring about someone that's at a distance to you is actually a higher moral achievement. And I think this relationship between distance and I guess care about is a really important one that we'll delve into in the next few minutes. So thank you so much for everyone for sharing this, the examples that you shared. So the way we've structured this presentation and the next is very much that I will present a bit of theory and data where possible, and then we'll open it up for a discussion by all of us. And I'm now going to say a few words about what Joan Tronto has suggested in her book called The Moral Boundaries of Care. Sorry, the book is called Moral Boundaries, a political argument for an ethic of care. And, I really feel that this book exemplifies what Einstein meant when he said that everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. I really feel that, you can read one page in this book and it represents a vast swathe of theory and work that has been really elegantly captured in 200 pages or so. And I would say that even if you remove one sentence from the book, it would be too reductionist. So I remember sitting on lots of airplane flights and opening this book and thinking, okay, I'm going to read a chapter, but not getting beyond one page. So I can really recommend it for everyone to read. The image that I'd like to share with you is this one, which is a picture of a cloud of birds. The term is murmuration. It's a starling murmuration where the birds are flying in this cloud that's making this beautiful shape. And the analogy that I'd like to draw is to the movement that moral development showed over the course of history. So in pre-industrial, in pre-capitalist societies, morality, in other words, what is good and what is bad and what is virtuous, was very much determined in a local context, in a village or a small gathering or set of dwellings where patriarchy was already quite present, but the rules were made by a relatively small group of people. As trade and later on industry developed and capitalism arrived, these small clusters of people required rules of engagement across a distance. So, while it was okay for me and maybe the village over the hill to trade initially, as we started to trade with cities, as cities emerged, as the printing press emerged, social distance increased. And I'm using social distance here to mean the literal physical distance between people geographically. And consequently, these rules became to be documented, and they were almost like this cloud of birds where they took on a life of their own. The problem, however, is that this became increasingly disconnected from the contextual life that people were living. And, Tronto doesn't make the argument that, the one is better than the others. She just observes this movement, and I agree with that. But it's useful to note how a morality became based on reason, on laws, on agreements that a large, scalable number of people could make. So as this happened, there were three boundaries that emerged, and it's reminiscent of what Mbuyiselo was saying about the cultural boundary to care. I think, in fact, that is, one example of one of the boundaries that had emerged. So the first one at the top is the separation between morality and particular life experience or contextual life experience, where an abstract moral point of view became the ideal. And of course, this draws on the work of Immanuel Kant and the critique of pure reason. The argument basically being that the highest moral achievement is one that can be reasoned and argued. The second boundary emerged from a split between political life and morality. And we were talking about this in our preparation for today, where as this became increasingly gendered, this relationship developed between nationalism or a fondness for the homeland, depending on the domestic female or the woman at home, the virtuous woman at home. The classic example in popular culture recently was The Handmaid's Tale. That kind of picture of the chaste, and even the costume that was used in that film is reminiscent of the types of chastity boundaries that were imposed on women at the time. But it becomes a sentimental morality that's contained in the space of the private. And that then is the third moral boundary, that is the split of the private and the public life. So particular, abstract, sentimental, political, private, and public, these were gendered, and these were constructed as gendered. So men were positioned as being abstract reasoning people who are the important decision makers in political life and public life and professional life later on. And women were very much associated with being the caregivers at home in a private space. Tronto I'll delve into this in one of the next presentations, but Tronto speaks about the challenge that women face to access spaces where decisions are made in modern society. and she calls it the difference dilemma, where there's this catch-22, or there's this quandary where if you want to get to the table where men are sitting and making decisions, there's two strategies. The one strategy could be that you conform to that space, and that you start to take on the culture and values of that space in order to operate in that space. But then you need to compromise some of the values that you bring from your experience to the space. The other strategy is to argue that you, especially because you bring a different voice, your contribution is valuable. The problem, however, is that then you are only ever the woman's voice. You are not bringing a contribution to the argument that the other people seated around the table are offering. So what Tronto suggests is that a strategy that might get around this, and I think this is an observation of a lot of the work that women's movements and feminist movements have worked with, is to increase, to challenge the framework itself, to challenge the fact that there's a center of power and that there are margins, and consequently to raise the value of the things that happen at the margins, especially care. We are going to jump quite soon into a discussion about that. But I really felt that that's really important to mention, that is the context within which we are talking about this. So just before I pass over to the panel, let me show some more recent contemporary examples of these boundaries, where in the previous presidential election, the one candidate called Hillary Clinton a nasty woman. The familiar adage that good girls go to heaven, bad girls go everywhere. And in one of the opening plenaries, Kate Gilmore made the very astute observation that it's never been so good to be so bad. The point being that feminist women, outright loud women who are speaking their truth, are often positioned as not good. And the definition of good is associated with motherhood or caregiving. And this is just before I get to the panel question, this is what Tronto used as, or mentioned in her critique of the work of Carol Gilligan. So Carol Gilligan published this book in a different voice in the early 1980s, where she observed that the theories of psychological moral development, which I think are still very much in use today, proposed by Erik Erikson and Lawrence Kohlberg, were theories about men and boys written by men, and that this was held in psychological discourses as representative of all people. She then, this book is drawing on data from 4 studies where she actually asked the same kinds of questions to women and girls about moral dilemmas, about life and death, about Roe versus Wade, about decisions about safe abortion, about decisions about euthanasia, really difficult moral dilemmas. And she observed that for the responses that the women and the girls gave, their highest moral achievement in the way they expressed it was from a more relational, connected, caring perspective. And then she described from that what an ethic of care could look like. What Tronto observed quite correctly is that Carol Gilligan's contribution is often confused to mean that women are therefore more moral because they are more caring. And Tronto was actually saying, well, that's not really what Carol Gilligan said. She just observed that the association with caregiving had a different kind of morality than the ethic of reasoning or the ethic of justice that boys and men were presenting. So let me ask a question to our panelists, and let me start with Asanda, and then I'd like Gary to go next. And the question is one that I've come across in women's movements, in feminist movements. It's a bit of a setup, and I hope we can expose the setup that I'm putting here. But let me mention that up front. And if we think about caregiving and women's behavior, could you reflect on the question whether women are inherently more moral than men?
Well, I mean, I don't think that women are any more moral than men, but I think that society socializes and grooms women to be more moral. I think society expects women to be the moral compass. And so in being socialized to be more moral and to be, care more about things, then women come across as being more moral, but it's not necessarily that we are born more moral. I think everybody's born more or less with the same level of morality, but women are socialized into being more moral, whereas men are allowed to get away with a lot more morally questionable things. And there isn't as much pressure from society for them to follow specific moral standards. And that's why it seems like women are naturally moral, but actually it's more socialization than a natural innate thing that we have as people.
Thanks, Asanda. Gary?
Yeah, I think Carol Gilligan's work inspired us a lot to think about the high point of human development not as individual achievement, which I think so many boys and men are socialized into. And in fact, if we ask men in many parts of the world, what do they see as their main identity or role or function, they'll typically say my work, what are the things I produce. And those can be seen in a relational way. If I'm doing that because it allows me to support my family, it allows me to care for others. But I think many men, and the way that we socialize boys and men, is to see that as my individual accomplishment. And many of the men, and often women, held up as kind of the amazing stars of the world are those who have made things, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, making big corporations that make more stuff, as opposed to, is the moral high point my interdependence and my connection with others? And I think that I think being, if you want to, we often refer to it in some kind of colonialist development language as being closer to the ground, by which we mean those who feel the daily effects of environmental degradation or harsh neoliberal economic policies that mean families don't have enough to survive, that those who feel that are typically women doing the care work, feeling directly the impacts of issues. And I think in a sense of their morality, if we want to call it that, is tied to the fact that they are living these effects every day. And I think we allow too many men to be in positions, or we raise them to be, or they're praised for their ability somehow to make decisions without considering the implications in the daily lived experiences of others. So I do think, and I think the name of the MenEngage conference this time, of trying to say, I think where we bring men into a relational morality, to call it that, is that you feel the daily experiences of what it is to look at the effects of a decision that you made as a World Bank employee or head of a government someplace, to be able to feel what that means for the other and to acknowledge your connection to them, rather than this ongoing ideal that if you produce more in your individual achievements being the high point of how we measure, and not only masculinity, I would say corporate feminism in some ways is also trying to say, well, feminism means let's put more women in those positions of power to do similar kinds of harmful behaviors, as opposed to let us push toward a common relational, connected, interdependent morality that we should have for all humans, male and female. Anyway, great question, Vessel. Thank you for that.
No, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Asanda. Mbuyiselo, just because Gary raised the point of the name of the symposium, the Ubuntu Symposium, and I am because you are Umuntu. Do you want to maybe just and lots of theorists have pointed out the similarity between an ethic of care and an ethic of Ubuntu. Metz comes to mind, Thaddeus Metz at the University of Johannesburg, and Elena Moore at the University of Cape Town. So there are a few that have explored this space where Ubuntu overlaps, but where Ubuntu is different from care. Is there something you wanted is there something you could contribute about the similarity or difference between Ubuntu and thinking about care? Just make sure your mute is still on, Mbuyiselo.
Thank you so much, Vessel. I think one of the what makes Ubuntu peculiar is that you are, in fact, it says that you are not a community, or you are not an individual. You are part of the bigger, of the collective. So in our society is that when you would not keep quiet or look the other way when someone is suffering. The suffering may be economical. I mean, I'm talking about. Before the advent of colonialism. So caring or Ubuntu would in fact be premised on that. For me to be who I am and to be well, spiritually, physically, mentally, you would have to. I need to make sure that I'm my brother's keeper. So there is a clear, direct connection that you will not. That is why when Vessel and colleagues, that you would not in an African setting, you would not. In fact, there would be few people that would be poor. By our standards, now, someone you would not allow or just fold your arms when you know that your neighbor, would sleep hungry. Well, it has its own some toxic ramifications. Where again, culturally, it would. Somehow it would also work against women, because then there would be practice like ukungenela, that my brother has died and now I would be forced to go and get married to Nomzamo or Nobantu because my brother has died, and the reasoning being that I must make sure that I take care of. So when a vessel, I'm saying that there is a direct link. But I just want to go back to your initial question about morality and then agree with what Asanda said. That's why I always go back and use my mother as an example. Vessel, there would be, when you smoke and you are black, you are a woman. And when you drink alcohol, you are black, you're a woman. You'd be looked upon. You'd be called names, because then you are an antithesis of what an African upright moral woman would be. So because that drinking and smoking would only be, this is men's, it's men's right. This is what we do well. That is why I always go back and when I look at my mother, she may not have called herself a feminist, but all the things that she did when a person, well, in fact, when I look back, it in fact was to reject, challenge patriarchy. My mother smoked, my mother drank. All of the things that in Sharkville, when you were black, you were a woman, you would not be permitted, allowed, encouraged to do. She did all of those. So I'm just saying that again, what Asanda said, and I fully agree with her that it's when you say you're moral, it's because you are immoral as a woman. It would be like, oh, but she's not smoking. She attends Mañano, she's a morally upright because she goes to church, she cooks, she looks well after the family. All of those things would in fact guarantee you that some moral pedestal, which is higher, that look, and even the Bible would say, a lot of women would quote, it's Psalm 31, a righteous woman or a perfect woman, subject to correction, I may not remember the correct psalm, but a lot of women, if you are not found or your characteristics are not reflected in that psalm, there's something wrong about you. You are either immoral. So again, with a vessel, I think that there is a direct linkage, especially in our African setting where morality relates directly and speaks to Ubuntu. You said it in Xhosa, I'll say it in Sotho. Mutu ki mutu ka batho. Umutu ubanikile mutu. Meaning that you would not exist without me, and the same is true. I would not exist without you. Right. Thanks, Vessel.
Thanks, Mbuyiselo. No, and as you're talking, it just shows me how those boundaries even when women are in spaces that they can have an influence on society, those boundaries still exert a powerful impact. Friends, I'm just going to present some definitions around an ethic of care, and then we'll take a quick break. We're coming up to the first hour of the session, and then we'll take a break and come back. So, if we speak about an ethic of care, the way Tronto defined her definition with Berenice Fisher was that, and I'll read it because to me it's quite a poetic statement. On the most general level, we suggest that caring be viewed as a species activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, life-sustaining web. And the similarities with what you were describing as Ubuntu very much come up in this description as well, Mbuyiselo. I'm conscious that Thomas is struggling a little bit with the device and the connection. So, Thomas, if you're with us again, just if Yoni could just spotlight you so that you can join the panel when you've got a secure connection again. So this is the structure of the seminar series, actually, the 4 phases of an ethic of care. So starting on the right, the one we're talking about today is this idea of caring about something. It is you are attentive to the one that you are caring about. You are having a feeling of care. It's an emotional response. Secondly, there is taking care of, which means providing some resources for and taking responsibility for the resources for the one in need of care. So as Mbuyiselo was describing, that your neighbor, you actually take responsibility for 1 bread a week or 1 bottle of milk a week or some groceries. Giving care is the very tangible, intimate, close, proximal connection between the one who is giving care and the one who is receiving care. And, this is very much how care work has often been defined, is the dressing my child or dressing my daughter or washing them or feeding them or caring for myself, like healthcare for myself. And then receiving care is to actually receive that care and respond accordingly. And as you would notice from the definition, it was not a binary definition of only one person providing care and one person receiving care, nor was it only limited to people. It was about caring for things around us as well, including the environment. So what Joan Tronto really observed, which I think is really important to note, are 2 extra levels to this sequence. The first one is the level of ethics. So the ethic of attentiveness, of responsibility, of competence, and responsiveness match each of those. And then the other is the fact that this represents a spectrum of power. So in society, those who have the most power are the ones who are usually caring about something, while those who enjoy the least relative power are usually the ones that are giving care or receiving care. Also, we tend to stigmatize those who are in need of care. We've created a society where the expression of a care need is stigmatized and consequently quite marginalized. So this is the one that we will focus on today, and after the break, to talk about what it takes to overcome the ignorance that men have of understanding what someone needs in terms of care. So this ignorance, Tronto calls it an epistemological ignorance. In other words, a worldview that simply does not notice care and care work. And in closing, before we take our stretch break, could I'll ask, you either raise your hand or anyone who could contribute. Is there any experience or data that tells us a little bit more about this inability, particularly of men, to notice care due to this blindness? So I'm not sure if no pressure to provide any data, but maybe just some reflections on that. This is what we're seeking to overcome here.
Sorry for me being away a bit. My network is bad because a lot of people work from home and the networks are not suitable for that. So I'm back again. So I missed a bit. Sorry for that. I think one example could be that work that has previously been male dominated, when they turn into more women dominated, the status is lower and the salaries are lower, etc. So for example, medical doctors and lawyers in Sweden have been traditionally male and very normative positions in society with a lot of status, but now when these positions turn into more women positions, their status will be lower and salaries, etc. as well. So especially with doctors, I think it's a care profession, and it's not. I think there's ignorance of the importance because it's of the gender situation with men and women in the workplace. If we look at it professionally, so I guess it's a kind of a blindness from men that they don't see that there is a gender power dynamic in our societies that creates this. English is not my first language. It's late in the afternoon, so I'm missing some words. Sorry for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Any other comment?
Sure, Vessel, if I can comment, I do think we see in the very, I mean, even the architecture of homes and our lives, how much we make care invisible, particularly for men and boys. And I think about, I lived many years in my second country of Brazil, and I think from seeing some apartments in South Africa, middle-class apartments and homes in South Africa and many other parts of the world where there are quarters for maids or live-in servants, or separate entrances in apartment buildings and sometimes houses as well, reminding a lot of modern hotels that have the places that are hidden where you don't see all those individuals who come out and do the care work. So even the geography of how we, or the architecture often of how we construct, middle-class nuclear family life in some parts of the world is meant to make care kind of invisible. It happens by people who get paid not very much in places where you don't see them, and they come and go even without you seeing them. And typically women administer that in many households. Certainly that's the norm in much of Latin America, if not, and I would say South Asia and parts of sub-Saharan Africa as well, where that caregiving is done by often paid for by paid care work, but often done in a way that is invisibilized. And I think we see in the patterns as well of child rearing, of who does what, the expectations that girls participate in chores that are closer to home, that are in the home, that are care of individuals in the home. Boys often socialize to care. It is still a kind of care for the house, outside the house, the yard, or just have lots of free time. We make care a feminine attribute, and boys are considered, the cool stuff and the place where you learn how to be in the world and, be a leader in a public space, so to speak, becomes the high point of what we think manhood and masculinity is supposed to be. And so not surprising that, as we survey adult men around the world, the number of women and men who repeat those ideas, who think a woman's main role is to be a caregiver and a man's main role is to be the provider, the breadwinner. We make that reality kind of every moment that we encourage our girls to be part of the care worlds within the home and send boys outside where they should be achieving and conquering and defending.
Yeah, Vessel, I wanted to share, colleagues, with you two incidents. That in fact continue to amaze me. The former president of Kusatu, Stumo Dlamini, used to be a male nurse. Now, that's one example. Whenever the EFF and other political parties wanted to reduce him to being a weakling, his profession would be used as a sign that he's unmanly. that look, you can't say anything, man. We nurse, man. You can't say anything, you know. But also look at, I mean, the population, the nurses in our society is that in the main majority are actually women. As a result, men even say that, look, care work, you know, or working in care facilities is in fact best handled by women. So you don't also have, I mean, you don't have a majority of men who look at being a nurse, you know, or occupational therapist or physiotherapist. There are few physiotherapists there, and I may not have the data in front of me, but I think there is this anecdotal evidence that proves it. That's one example. When Vessel, look at Kedi Mapatwe. Kedi Mapatwe is the president of Umkhonto Wesizwe, MKV. I hope I'm pronouncing it well. Asanda would correct me. It is her terrain. She does this almost every day. Now, Kedi Mapatwe lost her part of her arm when he allegedly was running away from the camp. But they are saying that you got injured running away because you had a cook. Oh, what do you like? I mean, this is Kebi's, and this is what they say. The retort is that, look, he's useless, man. He's just a cook, simple cook. He's not a soldier, you know. He's not strong. In fact, you are encouraged to run away from any profession, any job that is populated or in the majority are women, because when you are in those spaces that does largely care work, there is something that is wrong but this is unmanly. You are a sissy. It's the same way that when a Vessel and colleagues, in fact, a lot of men would fight. And you would probably have heard this when a Vessel in my work with you and others, when I would say to this man, I want to kiss you, man. When I'm not gay. A lot of us would fight that you are not even labeled gay, because when you are gay, the thinking is that, or the narrative is that, you know, look, he's unmanly. Look, there's something wrong about him. His makeup, I mean, his physiology, that he's gay, that he does care work. So that's the point I'm making with the two examples, is that throughout the world, I think, when you do anything that relates to work and work stroke women, you'd actually be shunned at as a man, because they'll tell you that, look, that is why even in our culture, you would not have, there are no spaces when Vessel that women would go to the mountain. You would know to the mountain. You do have. I mean, when you are in the, I mean, there's a group in our country where women go for initiation schools, but that is kept under wraps. That is, you can't even talk about it, because when you do this, it's like you are equating us, you're equating yourself as a woman to us men, because it is us who go up to the mountain to be toughened up. And the teachings there, when you are there, you are taught that, look, a part of what would distinguish you as a male, as a tough man, is that you must, in fact, have even more than 1, 2, 3 partners, so that you cleanse yourself by sleeping with them, not your original partner. Thanks, Vessel.
Thanks, Mbuyiselo, and I'm sorry that I moved us into the break there. This is a wonderful conversation. I think we're going to struggle to stay within the 2 hours. Before we go on the break, I want to show a quick video that's for me an expression of what we are talking about when we're talking about care about. And yeah, I'll leave you with it, and we can comment on it when we come back. So I'm just trying to figure out how my screen would work. Let me, it's fine. Ignore the advertisements in the corner, please. Let me try again once more. Yes, okay. No, it's not working. Let me play it like this. Okay, so let's talk about that when we come back. We're going to take a break for 5 minutes, and I'll put a timer on the screen, and then we'll see you again. Please do not log out of the call. You can stay on the call, and then we'll return and take the conversation forward. Welcome back, everybody. This last part of the conversation, we will spend some time. We will end with a conversation with all of you, and we would love to hear your thoughts and contributions. I was reading through some of the comments in the chat box in the break, and I think you raised a really valuable point, Sarah, about the devaluation of care work and women not having income but still doing the work, and the work needing to be counted as work. Gary made the point about that potentially being something to be paid. Asanda, it reminded me of colleagues of yours from Oxfam who had done lots of work in comparing and valuing the amount of time that women spend on work versus men, and noticing that in general women do globally, I think it was a difference of like 9 versus 7 hours. So women on average would work 9 hours, and men would work 7 hours. But the balance of that work was, for women, more than half of that work was unpaid, and for men, more than half was paid. So our work is definitely cut out for us in terms of valuing care. Yoni, just checking, are you online? Are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. Are you able to pin the panelists or spotlight them?
Yeah, they're all pinned, or they're all spotlighted. But I would recommend everybody, great, yeah, putting the videos on again.
Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Thanks, Yoni. So the last presentation from my side is at 2 levels of the spectrum. Firstly, quite an individual level, where I share some findings from my observation with one particular family, and then we'll take it to a much broader structural conversation about some of the policy implications of this piece of caring about. And just a reminder, I see we still have some colleagues and friends joining us. Before the break, we spoke about an ethic of care broadly, and one aspect of an ethic of care being the act of paying attention to something and noticing something and seeing something that you care about. And the negative side of that is those in power or enjoying privilege often being oblivious to what is happening around them, especially oblivious to care work. And we've spoken a lot about how care work is made invisible in our society. This is just 2 quotes from a family that I engaged with in a study where the story of Tando, who is it's not his real name, but he's a young father who he qualified as a financial analyst and ended up working in a financial institution in Johannesburg. And his girlfriend fell pregnant and delivered a child, or gave birth to a child. And he took the decision when he was 24, and he had just finished studying, he just got his first job, to him and his girlfriend had split up already at the time, already while she was pregnant, but he then agreed with her that the child should live with him. And compared to other work that we've done, where we saw young fathers, especially, not really being engaged in childcare of children of mothers that they had ended a romantic relationship with, quite often, that he, he did something that was not according to certainly the norm of the majority. The big difference is, of course, about money. So he had the resources to do that. Many young fathers in South Africa who are biological fathers identify with being a provider and feel they cannot be a father because they don't have an income. Where Thando did have an income, so he was able to, from a resource perspective, provide care for the child. So here is a quotation from him, and he said, that it's always been sort of in the back of my mind, having seen the arrangements that she was living in, not being funny or anything like that. It's just more that I always had the view that my daughter would fare a lot better in the environment that I was in. So he then mentioned a few things like availability of a car, a whole bunch of those aspects, and he was quite general about it. So he, I could see that he was a little bit uncomfortable about the fact that he had more money than the biological mother did, but he also wanted to provide care for the child. So he then moved the child into his house. He was staying with his father at the time, and he then employed a caregiver to care for the child during the day while he was working. And then with the help of his grandmother, he then took over care of the child in the evening. So then the second quotation is where he spoke about this care that he would give. So, he explained to me that at the time he didn't have the maturity to understand the importance, but nevertheless he did do things like changing nappies, like bathing the child, like putting the child to sleep. He did do that, but the burden of care was certainly on his grandmother and the caregiver whom he had employed at the time. I put this example here because to me it was an example of this caring about someone over a distance and then closing that distance. He was very attentive to his daughter and her needs. And then the last quotation is just the fact that he commented on the care that he was giving to his son. At the time of our interview, his son had just been born, and it was his third child. And I had asked him, would he have kept on or would he have tried for another child if his son had been female? And he said, well, he wouldn't rule it out. So he would have actually attempted another pregnancy if his son had not turned out to be a son, but had been a boy. Had been a girl. And then he made this interesting statement that you always want a boy, but you realize being a father that girls end up being more precious. It's just this totally different dynamic. So let me just ask for some reflection, and let me see who wants to reflect on these three comments from this young father. Asanda, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting that even in his choosing to care or to do care work, he still was handing over quite a lot of it to the women in his life, namely the grandmother and the caregiver. And so here's this man who was doing quite an important thing and quite a good thing and was actually taking on care work, but he's still sort of in some ways outsourcing it to a female family member and an employee. And I think that speaks to the fact that even where gender stereotypes are being broken, there's still a level and a point at which they're not completely broken, and there's still sort of some sense of boundaries. And even in terms of his framing of the difference between raising a boy and raising a girl, it still shows that in his head he still has, the different socializations that are required of a boy and a girl, and that he does still hold some sexist views, which, I mean, it's not a surprise because we're all products of socialization. But I found it interesting. But also, I mean, I want to add that I think maybe it's not written about as much, but in South African society, African society is about this concept of Ubuntu is about taking care of any and all that are related to you and beyond. And so this concept and idea of a man actually taking in the child because he has better means financially is not something that's foreign to the culture. It's actually something that happens quite often, where it becomes obvious that the mother will not be able to take care of this child financially, and whoever has a better means then becomes the one who takes care of the child. And it's usually, again, often possible because there's a mother or a grandmother who then participates and becomes, one of the main caregivers, and therefore the child is still able to have a connection to a female role model or a female member of the family. So I think part of the problem that we face, particularly on the continent, is that there's a specific lens that has for too long been allowed to create an impression that some of these things don't happen as much as they do, and our societies are in a lot of ways quite matriarchal, actually, and so this kind of thing does happen more often than we know of or than we talk about. And I understand, of course, it's because in the main there is largely absentee fatherhood, but that's also, again, a product of our history and labor and migration and what it did to Black families in particular and our understanding of family.
Yeah, I think, Asanda, just as you raise a really valuable point about the fact that there's, if we want to ask the question, is there an inherent set of values? The values tend towards caring, regardless of the fact that we do counter them with the boundaries that we have created. I wanted to, Thomas, I'll ask you to come in next, because I'm interested in this experience of a mother and a father being in different places and caring for children from different households. Because I know in Sweden that there's, you might be more in touch than I am in terms of the statistics, but I'm interested in this kind of co-parenting from two different households as a potential reflection on Tando. But before we do that, just to back up what Asanda was saying with some data, where we saw in the State of South Africa's Fathers Report in 2018 that co-residence, I've critiqued the idea of co-residence as an indicator of caring in many spaces, where just living with a person doesn't mean that that you're caring for them, So, but nevertheless, that co-residence, as we go on the income levels from the lowest quintile to the highest quintile, that the middle class in South Africa are largely all co-resident fathers with children. The average is about 70% of children live with their fathers for the top quintile in the country. And what's interesting is that in the lowest quintile, where the lowest category of income in South Africa, the racial split is quite clear because of the legacy of the country, of course, that migrant labor, etc., has led to Black households, especially having this construction of fathers being apart from the household. But what's interesting in terms of the racial dimension is that in the middle class, there's almost no significant difference between white, Black, and Indian families in South Africa. That I think the difference between the most co-resident families are Indian, and then followed by white, Black, and colored. And I'm using those categories in a problematic, so just disclaimer, subtitle, I don't like those categories. But having said that, it's really interesting to see that Black families are as co-resident as white families in terms of children living with fathers in the upper middle class. I think that's an encouraging sign. It's not, it really exposes the idea that absenteeism is a racial or genetic quality of some kind. It's not. It's a function of the economic marginalization that we've created. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. Let me pass to Thomas and give us a little bit of a reflection from your context.
Thank you, Wessel. Yes, Sweden is, I don't know if you know the World Value Survey, but Sweden is far away in one of the corners, which Sweden as a secular and self-expressing country. So I don't know really the data, but I think about 40% of the marriages in Sweden end up with divorce. And that's usually happening when the children are small. So me, myself, and a lot of friends as well have shared custody of our children. So my two eldest children that are 10 and 12, they live with me every other week, and with their mother in another place every other week. And I think that's quite a common thing to do in Sweden, especially in the middle class, that we have this shared custody and that we take full responsibility one week, and the other week they are with their other parents, so to say. And usually we have so many different families, because then you meet new partners and get new children, etc. So it's very diverse. But I think the thing with Sweden is that men and women, fathers and mothers, actually do take their full responsibility the week where the children are with them. So I think usually when the children are small and when the parents still live together, women take most of the care responsibilities, and they are the primary parent, and men can slip away. They do take a few months of parental leave usually, because that's kind of a norm as well in the middle classes, but they are not responsible. So they might not know the size of the clothes of the children, and they don't know if they need to go and fill up with diapers, because they don't have the primary parent role. But the women tell them, go and buy diapers, and they will do that. But then when they split up and divorce, they need to become primary parents. So I think it's kind of a feminist achievement in Sweden, this that people do separate, because then men will have to take full responsibility in their week, and women can get time off from being parents, which is of course not always a good thing. You miss your children, etc. But I think this has led that to women in Sweden being more independent, and men in Sweden being more primary parents, because they didn't have to when they lived with the mothers, because then she was the primary parent. But I think that's an interesting conclusion from the situation in Sweden, that the men has become primary parents because of the quite high divorce rate. So I don't think divorce is necessarily a bad thing, as long as men then take the responsibility. And we don't have, like in South Africa, as you said, there are a lot of other people caring, but in Sweden we don't live close to our primary families as well, that we had when we were small ourselves. So my family lives 700 kilometers from where I live, so I don't have any support from my mother or anyone else, and I think that's mostly the case as well, because so I think the men in Sweden actually do take responsibility. There's no backup. So it's, in a sense, it's a feminist revolution in Sweden, that we do divorce quite a lot. That's food for thought.
Thanks, Thomas. And as you're talking, I'm reminded of Gary was talking about how we make domestic work invisible and how we make care work invisible. And one of the ways is the popular sitcoms or shows on television, where I'm amazed at how immaculate people's homes are. So it's a story of a family of 3 children, mom and dad, the kind of typical nuclear family, and a dog. And the homes are so, of course it's a studio, but the idea is that no, this family just lives in this perfect home. And in the story there's lots of drama, but you never see anybody do the cleaning to have this, this brownstone with a huge lawn actually cleaned. You don't see that work. So that also reinforces that norm. And I'm going to the structural implications in a moment, and then Gary and Mbuyisela, I'd like you to come in. But I wanted to share one point that Thomas reminded me about, that in South Africa in COVID-19, in our initial lockdown, we had a prevention of travel. And we've had, of course, it had, as elsewhere in the world, it had a massive impact on the economy. And the largest sector, so in terms of numbers, the most women who are employed in the same job are domestic workers in South Africa. And the precarity of that work is extreme. That women lost their, a massive amount of domestic workers lost their income because of the lockdown and haven't recovered. We've seen in some of the data coming out that men are recovering, as in other countries, that men are recovering employment better than women are. But within that context, one of the families that I interviewed, the mother is, or the woman of the household is the breadwinner. She earns a much higher salary than the father, and he has been the primary caregiver. But of course, he was doing primary caregiving in a context where there was a domestic worker and a child carer who was employed in the house with them. And it was really interesting to see during the lockdown where she was not available and she could not do the work in the house, that he then had to do all the work that she was doing. You know, in that interview, they said, "Oh, we never knew the laundry line is so uncomfortable to reach. We never knew the basin for the washing is at an awkward position outside of the house. We can move it closer." You know, and I didn't realize that the you know, the dishwasher, you need to jiggle the button to make it work. You know, so all of these particularities of caregiving, including the children's clothing, etc., were carried by the domestic worker, while the couple had actually reflected on the fact that, oh no, the father is the primary caregiver. But the lockdown then removed the opportunity for this ignorance, and he actually had to do it, which seemed like a really valuable opportunity to then improve the domestic worker's context when she returned, because he actually now knows what she's dealing with on a daily basis. So let me just check before I go to the structural stuff. Is there, Mbuyiselo, Gary, is there anything you want to say at this moment, reflecting on this kind of individual context?
Maybe I'll jump in. I have to step away in just a moment again as well. I've got some work being done on the house. So I was thinking of your comment on TV. We did a study together with the Gina Davis Institute that has been pushing Hollywood to produce more spaces of seeing women and girls in leadership roles and as equals. And their slogan is, "If she can see it, she can be it." And we've reached out to partner with them to look at what boys are watching on television in terms of gender roles and masculinity. We carried this out during, the beginning of lockdown. So boys, we looked at the most 20 watched and streamed shows for boys ages 8 to 13, which is the age range that is spending more time watching TV and streaming among all of us in the US anyway at this moment. And what we found is that boys are seeing lots of roles of women and girls virtually equal in terms of public representation, leadership, being the heads of companies, et cetera. But what we continue to show too many images, and an overwhelming number of images where men and boys don't do care. And when they do care, they're more often shown as incompetent caregivers. So your point of, the household being, when it's shown as dirty, it's usually shown as, because a man was left in charge. And of course, we don't show when women are, again, behind the scenes doing all those things to make it an organized and livable household. And I was thinking about, what do we need to do that at the individual level of boys, particularly that, that we see we could never walk away from care. And Thomas talked about, the feminist revolution and success in Sweden, which does mean that men can't walk away for the most part of some of their care duties. Like, what do we do earlier on? And I was reminded of I had the chance to visit a program that was a vocational training program in Trinidad in the Caribbean some years back, that did a lot of work, particularly with boys who left school at early ages, and they got training in a trade. There was also equal numbers of young women in the program, but one of the kind of gender breaking features that they had was that every student had to spend some time working in their daycare center. So it was an obligatory part of the curriculum that boys and girls had to spend, I think it was 4 to 6 hours a week, doing hands-on care for children. Wow. And I think about that compared to sort of, what's been done in Europe and the US and Canada of these electronic babies that are sent home, and you have to care for them over a weekend so that teenagers get an idea of what it is to care, what an artificial experiment that is, versus we make you from early on have to do hands-on care and really make that part of how we raise boys. Just thinking about, how do we switch this around to say, you have no choice. You live in this household. You also have to do some hands-on care. So anyway, I was thinking about that as I listened to you talk about Endo and Thomas explaining, thinking about the Swedish context of men can't back away for the most part, from their responsibilities. Anyway. Yeah.
Thanks, Gary. Mbuyiselo, did you have any comments on this individual story?
Yes, Vessel. I want to share with you two stories. And then 2 days ago when we were preparing for this, I remember you, when I told you that for the past 7 years being single, how I appreciate, the work, the unpaid work of women that we take for granted. But that's the first example. I mean, the things that I have to do, or I do, or as a single man, past 7 years, wake up, do my bed, open windows, prepare breakfast. But the second interesting, few weeks ago, my grandson and his mother visited me. I mean, we Lereko is 6. We had to go and play. I mean, we were playing catch-up football, and, just after an hour, I felt I was exhausted. And I said, Lati, to my daughter, how do you cope? And all she could say to me was, these are the joys of being a mother. And for me, I'd never experienced that it's care work when you play with your grandchildren. It's really care work. So I'm just saying that these experiences, they continue to shape and my appreciation of what unpaid work is, but also what care work is in real, true sense of the word. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Mbuyiselo. And, in the third seminar, we're going to talk about caregiving. And I'm going to raise the question whether playing with children counts as caregiving, because it is different from washing dishes or preparing food. My argument is that it does count as caregiving, and that it's valuable for children's development especially, but it's also, lots of the images data and others have shown that men prefer those kind of things to the other often seen as more laborious tasks. So we are now actually coming up to running out of time. I'd like to hear from our audience as well. And, we've got a nice group we don't have a very big group. It's been 22 people, but I really appreciate all of you staying in the conversation. It's been really nice to have your attention. Thank you so much. And we'll open up for questions and comments in a moment. I just wanted to close with the, thinking beyond the individual. If we talk about the structural and policy dimensions of this notion of paying attention, caring about, seeing, stepping over the ignorance that we often find due to the privilege that we carry. And, I've mentioned here, I was inspired by the notion, Martha Nussbaum did a lot of fantastic work on capabilities, and the fact that a capability, it's about what your ability is as an individual, but it also is about what is available to you in your context. That it's not only about what you can do, but it's also about the access you have to the environment around you to fulfill what you would like to do. So reflecting about that, if we have an individual father who has the agency and the interest to care about, what is the state and the social support for that then to actually be manifested? And the one policy that's currently under discussion in South Africa for the Children's Act, that is due for an amendment. There's actually a deadline by the end of next week for a submission on the Children's Act in South Africa. One topic in there is the rights of unmarried fathers. And a big point there is whether a father's name appears on the birth certificate of a child. So the contentious, there's lots of work being done that unpacks the rights arguments about this. But let me ask you, Asanda, especially, to give us some reflection on this in terms of, the difficult ethical question is, if we imagine a scenario where it's compulsory for a woman to name the father of a child, that feels that it compromises maybe the mother's rights. But on the other hand, if you don't have the father's name, a child may grow up without knowing who their father was. So those are the two arguments that are kind of going around. Have you got a reflection on that for us from your work?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think about quite a lot, because I'm actually even now just talking to a friend who's son's father wants to give him their name. So it's something that actually is quite topical and something that people talk about a lot. And it's complicated because we live in a country that has a high rate of rape, for example, and so you don't want to be forcing people who are victims of rape to then have to apply for special dispensation in order for them to not disclose that they don't know the name of the father or that it was not consensual. Then the second issue that you have is that we are living in a country again where absentee fatherhood is quite a rife thing. And so if you start forcing people to put the father's name on the birth certificate, what then happens is when they're looking for a school for their child, when they're trying to access all kinds of things, they suddenly have this burden of chasing after this man, which a lot of women struggle with when they're particularly looking to enroll their children at school, that schools insist on having the father's name, and they insist on, having some kind of explanation for what happened to the father, which actually then just becomes a re-traumatization of people who are already feeling abandoned and quite traumatized by the experience of abandonment, because for some of them, the abandonment happens quite early on before they even give birth to the child. So by the time you give birth to the child, this child already doesn't have a father. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we do have an issue where fathers need to not feel like they have the option to opt out, that they have the option to not be present or to not participate or to not be financially responsible for their children. And so we have to weigh up these two. And I think that, at the present moment, this ability to not have the father's name is a good thing. But also, I think that as people doing work with women, I think we probably need to do a little bit more work around helping women to understand that it's the responsibility as parents, but also it's the right of their children to have financial contribution from their fathers, and so they should pursue the law and the legal means to get that kind of contribution, because it's in the child's interest to be able to have access to whatever it is, whether it's healthcare or schooling, whatever it is that both parents can afford, rather than being constrained to what only the mother can afford.
Yeah. Thanks, Asanda. Thomas, are you in touch with that policy in Sweden? Do you know what's the requirement for birth registration or the process?
Actually, if you're married, the state presumes that the father is the father of the child, and if you co-live, you have to go to the social security office and prove that you are the father of the child, which is quite unmodern. So we have a discussion in Sweden about that just because you're married, you're not necessarily the father, because we know there are a lot of cheating going on around society. So, and of course, if you co-live or cohabit, you shouldn't need to do that. So we have a discussion on that in Sweden, on that quite unmodern law, that the law presumes that if you're married, you're the father of the child. So that's the situation here. But we have a very different situation from South Africa. Most of the children are born within relationships where men take some kind of responsibility and co-live with the mothers. Even though, as I said before, women tend to be the primary caregivers, men do take. We have a system with 10 days of fatherhood leave when the child is born, and I think most of the men, 90% of the men, take that. So they spend 10 days at least at birth at home with the mother and the child.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Thomas. So we've got, I'm not going to go into the other policy or structural dimensions. I think if you want to bring some of them in, Gary and Mbuyiselo, maybe weave them into the discussion that we're having for the last 10 minutes. Let me ask Yoni if you could maybe read to us or point to us a particular question that you think we should engage with. I haven't had an opportunity yet because I've been moderating to actually track yeah. So let me stop screen sharing. Yes, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, great. So that way we can see other people as well. So there have been a couple of comments, people reflecting on what's been shared by panelists. So there hasn't necessarily been a lot of questions. But Camille, for example, shared to everyone, like the earlier discussion reminds me of the work of Hope in Action in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, working on positive masculinities. They did an exercise to debunk the men's perception that they were doing most of the work for the house because they were providers, and thus were more valuable and entitled to certain things like leisure time. And it turned out that men did 9 tasks per day and women 13 per day. But as you said, these tasks are made invisible and so not valued. Maybe some sorts of care, like providing, are more valued than others, like giving care. And there's a question mark there, but I think Camille shared her perspectives. Thank you. Asanda has shared the Oxfam report around the inequality report, Time to Think. So there's a link here in the chat that people can look at. Tarima says, I am from Bangladesh. I want to point out that the patriarchal structure and mindset of society creates hinders on the way to men gaining caring traits. Right, so that's also the perspective that patriarchy also affects men. Let me just see what that is.
If there's anybody in the group who would want to post a question, or if you want to speak your question, you are welcome. Please, you are welcome to raise your hand or to post a question, and we'll be happy to engage. Let me just while. So
could I propose a question for the next session, because I've been thinking a lot about that here. In Sweden, we have universal subsidized childcare and a very generous parental leave system since the 1970s. And I wonder about what has done to the relationship between us and parents and our children, because it's kind of a social democrat thing about everyone that should work and earn money and be away from their houses, and the children are usually at the kindergarten for like 45 hours a week, so they spend as much time out of the house as we as adults do. So I think our system is good, but it has also been putting everyone into an economical system that we say that we should value care, but I don't think it's always valued in economical terms, which is, I think, kind of the agenda. So I would like for us to think about that and come back to it in January at the next session, just like a teaser, because I think that's very important to see that we also need to acknowledge that spending time with our children is valuable, and we tend to leave them at kindergartens for a long time because we have an economical system that supports that as well. So just a reflection from my side.
Awesome, thank you. I can see Gustavo raise the hand. Gustavo, please go ahead.
Hello, thanks. I am from Bolivia. Thanks for the presentation. I will be take the information for my work in health. It's very important. Thanks for the information.
Oh, okay. No, you're very welcome, Gustavo. Did you have a question or an additional comment? Thanks, Thomas. We will certainly take that into the next conversation, the 14th of January in next year, after your winter or still in your winter, but we're going into summer down here. I wanted to just check on the comment that I think it was Sarah who made that, or Camille, in terms of the different types of tasks. And Gary, from the Banda Bereno findings in Rwanda, was there some finding related to the different kinds of care work that men and women do? I remember there was something quite interesting that emerged there.
Yeah, and the initiative that Vessel is referring to is actually, I think, on another session. I'm not sure if at the same time, the colleagues with Romrec are actually working together with us and with the Ministry of Health in Rwanda to make it a national policy, to make it part of the prenatal visit when a couple comes in or the woman comes in, that parent training is made available as a national policy, somewhat inspired by some of the work in Sweden to make the papas clubs and the father training but to make it a national policy. So it's trying to move toward the structural. A key part of that has been an activity, and it sounds somewhat similar to the Hope in Action description there. That is, we have an activity where men and women look at what they do in terms of their time use over a 24-hour day. And we saw at baseline very much the standards that men do care for the house outside. So things that are the garden, that are planting, that are the maintenance of the house tend to be what men do, and somewhat playing. And then the next things they move into maybe doing food preparation, but getting them to do cleaning and the care of bodies in the home is really kind of the last holdout that takes a lot longer to make it happen. We did see that as men go through that awareness, they do take on more tasks. And that was not only reported by them, but by their female partners. So we do see this as changeable, but I think, getting to the question of structural, I think it's really important that we think not only that this is like made available for a few men and women who are able to participate, but how to make it part of the whole birth process and even after. And so I think, I look forward to the structural discussions. And I think Thomas's point is really important of what is the care infrastructure that we need that get men to do our part? What is the care infrastructure that low-income households need? And how do we do it in a way that makes care part of our daily work, not that has to be so much in a capitalist model that the work we do is outside the home, away from the care that we do? What are ways that we can have sort of a more integrated sense that care is part of our lives, not the secondary part of them? So I hope we can come back to that later on.
Thanks, Gary. Marilyn, please.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. This is a quite interesting topic, and I just wanted to do a small comment. Like, I've got a grandson of 8 years old. So he's staying with his mother. The thing is, there's also that apparently they're not living with me. And his mother is sort of training him now to do a lot of chores in the house. Like, and the other day when I spoke to him, he said to me, no, Ma, I have to just do my washing. I have to put my washing in the washing machine. I have to do the kitchen. I just sort of clean the dishes. And I was quite proud of that, because I think that it was a good thing that she started off at that young age. And when my father went down, he wasn't too happy with it. And then he said, but why is this child doing so much work? So I said, well, I think it's a good thing that she started off at this young age, instead of us doing everything for him, because he's going to become, the time for us to instill some values in our children, we've got a minimum of, say, 18 years. From 18 years, they're on their own. So in that short time span, we need to instill as much values and morals within them. And I think for him, by that time, he might decide to go on his own. He will be able to be sort of independent if he can do his own thing, if he's been taught at a very young age. So I think that was quite an interesting thing for me to observe, that she's doing that. So yeah, it is true that having them to be sustainable or independent should start from a young age, especially for the boys. That's my comment. I just want to raise that.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. Where are you joining us from, Marilyn?
I'm in Cape Town in Menenberg, in Cape Flats.
Oh, really? Okay. A neighbor to Suleiman. Do you know Suleiman?
No.
So my colleague Suleiman Henry, who works at Tonke Gender Justice, lives in Menenberg.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's nice to meet you. Colleagues, we've reached 5 o'clock in my time. We've come to the end of the session. I saw you have another meeting, Thomas. I just want to do a quick round of, one sentence, 3 words from each of our panelists. So, Thomas, why don't you go first and just say 1 or 2 words, and then we'll go to Gary, Asanda, and Lucelo.
Thank you, Wessel. I think this has been a very interesting conversation, and I'm happy that it's not the last one, but the first of 4. So I would say I have a son who's 10 months, and I think he's teaching me new things every day about self-care and care. So I think it's important also to acknowledge what we can learn from the small children that are surrounding us. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Gary?
Yeah, I think, again, thank you, Vessel, for generating the idea and proposing this. I do think a revolution of creating a culture and an ethic of care for men is really the necessary flip side, I suppose, of the feminist revolution. There's no way that we achieve all the space that we need to politically and structurally for women's empowerment and full voice in the world without also bringing men into care, and not as an added thing, dependent on whether you happen to stumble upon being in a great father's training group, but that it really has to be how we structure our lives.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Asanda?
Yeah, I also just want to give my appreciation to Vessel for putting some of this work together, and particularly the topic of care and the politics of care. And I also want to appreciate also everybody on this call, and to say that for me, it's very important that when we talk about achieving gender equality, whether we're talking about GBV, whether we're talking about recognition of paid care work or unpaid care work, or whatever it is, that it's so important to always make sure that men are involved and that men are leading in some of these issues, so that gender equality doesn't get seen to be a woman's job and a woman's role and a woman's responsibility, and yet another burden that we have to carry. So I really appreciated being in a room where men were thinking very hard about these topics, and it wasn't just me as a woman who was constantly highlighting some of the problematics of patriarchy and the ways in which it influences our public and our private lives. And so I'm really grateful for this, and I hope that there'll be many, many more conversations, and I'm quite happy to participate in many more, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of some of these conversations. Thank you.
Thanks, Asanda. Mbuyiselo?
Vessel, once again, thank you so much. You made me to go back into, my past. My being short, but also something that I'd never given attention to is how a friend of mine who deeply cared about me, something that I never thought as being important. I just, so you made me to go back and looked at it. But also, I now reflect on when my mother had suffered from stroke, and she died in 1998. May her soul rest in peace. I would move from my house in Sebokeng, go to Sharpeville to cut her nails. Those things, they come back now. And I now see and appreciate how meaningful, how impactful they were. So I just want to thank you for the topic, but also to say that there is nothing that inherently stops us from caring. It is these artificial, toxic, man-made creations of what it means to be a real man. That in fact denies us the opportunity. When a vessel, they really deny us the opportunity to be caring. And this is the sad part about patriarchy, is that it's a system that really oppresses us as well. It denies us of our humanity. It denies us of our own vulnerability. So I just want to, in reflecting, just to thank you that you took me back to realize that, look, and to appreciate that here's a young man, same age as me. We're going to be 60 soon with him, that he cared for me. And I am eternally grateful for what he did in my life. Vessel, thank you so much. And thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Mbuyiselo. Happy birthday for 2 weeks' time. And colleagues, I see you on the 14th of January again. Over to Yoni. Thank you so much, Yoni.
Thanks so much to all of the speakers, to Wessel for organizing this. I thought it was a really, really rich conversation. And I'm tremendously looking forward to the next one. Actually, I feel like a space to take a pause and go very deep, and I appreciated that. I just want to share before everybody signs off. I hope you can share my screen, see my screen, that we are having, of course, ongoing conversations as part of the Ubuntu Symposium. So here you see the ongoing program. next week, Tuesday, and the Tuesdays to come, there will be plenary sessions. We'll have regional sessions on the Wednesdays and parallel sessions like this one on every Thursday. And this is the program for next week. So on Tuesday, we'll have a session on mental health, the male psych, and gender justice lessons for life after COVID-19. There's quite some attention for COVID-19, of course, over the coming period. And on Thursday, we'll have these 4 parallel sessions. I particularly wanted to highlight the Arab Fathers Revolution and dialogue on social transformation through men's caregiving, which is related to the conversation I think we had today. Yeah, so if you haven't done so yet, please do sign up, register for the Ubuntu Symposium. You can go to the app where you can find all the information about the sessions and the program. And I think that's it for me for today. Thanks so much. We hope to see you in January and preferably before.